Hi. Hi, welcome to this week's Think Tank. Today we are discussing our new design course. My name is Mark. I'm head of curriculum here, and I'm with Zoe.
Hi, I'm Zoe, course developer at Thinkful. And we have our two design course writers with us. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Derek Fogge. I'm new at Thinkful, just started this week as the mentor in residence. Started a couple months ago as a mentor for the front end course, and the last month or so we've been working on the design course. Right, starting as a writer now, cleaning it up and launching it.
He's also well lit.
And I'm Natalie. I am a graphic and visual designer. I'm based out in the San Francisco Bay Area, and yeah, excited to be here.
Great, thanks guys. So let's just start off by talking about your design experience. So can you tell us about your very first design project? Let's have story time. Derek.
Well, I was a designer for about 7 years, just designing. Started in advertising. The first thing I ever designed was professionally was an ad for Fox News. You know, you've got to do what they give you. So
What was the ad?
it was I think it was like the 20th anniversary or some crazy thing like that. It was literally pictures of all the newscasters' heads in a row, and my job was to go in and make sure all their heads were the same size regardless of the depth. So they looked like a 20-headed giant monster. So pretty glamorous stuff, you know.
How about you, Natalie?
Let's see. I think my first design project was maybe like my freshman year of college. I did a freelance project for a woman who worked for a local elementary school. They were holding like a benefit dinner. She wanted me to design like a postcard and a brochure for that evening's event. And I just remember thinking, like, I've never designed anything for anyone and like gotten paid for it. And I was trying to be like really professional the whole time, but I didn't even have Photoshop or Illustrator on my computer. So part of the deal we worked out was that she was going to pay me, but she was also going to buy the programs for me to use on my computer. So that was part of my payment.
This is a nice deal. Why did she trust you if you didn't have the tool?
That's a great question, and I don't know if I can answer that.
That's funny. So when you were a freshman in college, did you know you wanted to be a designer?
Yeah, so I went into school, I declared my major right away. So I came in saying I wanted a BFA in graphic design and came out with a BFA in graphic design.
And what about you, Derek? So before designing Fox News 20th anniversary, what led you to that? Like, when did you decide that that's what you wanted to do and make money?
Well, years before I actually found my way into the advertising industry, I tried to go to art school. Wasn't really for me. I went for graphic design, and it was a lot of fine art stuff, the foundational first year stuff, and it just didn't interest me at all. So I just quickly moved on and just started looking for a way in, another way in. Just, you know, somehow lucked my way in as an apprentice at an ad agency maybe 2 or 3 years later.
So interesting.
So Derek, where did you pick up the design skills that you use today?
Well, at the time, I literally picked them up as I went. The pressure of having to meet a deadline has always been my number one motivator. So yeah, on the job, the first week I learned Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator. I'm assuming they thought I knew that stuff when I got hired. Maybe I told them I did, maybe I didn't. But yeah, within a week or two, I picked all that stuff up. Just reading help files, right-clicking on everything.
It seems to be a trend.
Yeah.
It seems that designers start by not having Photoshop.
Yeah.
And then saying that they...
The trick is to just never say no. It's always
Right.
say yes.
Yeah.
And eventually it'll be true.
Cool. And then so after that, so Natalie, you got a degree in design.
Right.
And then what happened after that?
what happened after I got a degree in design?
Yeah. Did you keep on designing?
I did keep on designing. I actually went and taught for 2 years through a program called Teach for America. So I wasn't doing a whole lot of like actual graphic design, although I do think I had some pretty good looking worksheets for my students as a teacher. But after I finished up teaching, I joined a startup in San Francisco as a designer.
What do you guys think is the hardest part about working as a designer?
Handling rejection.
Yeah.
Being told your best idea is not going to work, and you have 2 minutes to figure out a new one.
Yeah. That, and I also think, you know, having to like communicate your decisions and almost like defend them to people, like project stakeholders, can be sort of tough because you might have a really good reason behind it and they might not understand that.
Yeah, you really have to be ready to justify all of your decisions in a way that they'll be able to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So do you guys have opinions on what skills are most highly valued for designers? Is it the tooling? Is it creativity?
Problem-solving skills, most likely. Being able to think through a design problem and come up with a solution that meets all the requirements, looks good, and is usable.
How about you, Natalie? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, tools are important. I think the fundamental design principles are going to be really graphic or visual or UX or interaction design. But I think overall, like as a designer, being flexible is so important because like project guidelines can change very quickly and you have to be able to like work with whatever they throw at you.
That's interesting. Are there skills that either of you are actively developing? Is the market changing and there's a need for acquiring new skills that sort of deviate off from those fundamental principles?
Yeah, actually with me, I made the transition from print and just graphic design into web design about 4 or 5 years ago, and really just became a full-time front-end developer in the last year. So I think the trend is to, if you're going into the web space, is to learn that medium as well as you can, learn programming as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's all they're all pretty interconnected these days.
Totally. Yeah, I'd kind of echo that same sentiment. Like I've been trying to build up my front-end skills as much as I can because I think it's just so useful today.
This might be a good moment to switch gears and let's talk about the design course that we just developed. Talk about that process, outline.
Okay. Well, the first hurdle was figuring out tooling. So you can't just design on paper. You have to actually make something that looks good. So we chose Photoshop as the environment to work in. It's pretty much the industry standard. Even if you're not designing, if you're just developing websites, people are going to hand you PSDs. You're going to have to know how to navigate those and organize them.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was the best way to move forward. And the next step is figuring out where a beginner should start with Photoshop in 2014. When I got really into Photoshop, it was about 8 years ago, and the number of functionality, the amount of functionality was really increased. So we tried to just keep it to the basics, the things that haven't changed since CS2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we also tried to incorporate, you know, like a project-based structure with the course. We thought it was really important that students had like, you know, hands-on projects that could help them build up their like, you know, obviously their skills with like the tools, but also build up like, I don't know, like the language and vocabulary to talk about their design decisions and kind of like communicate why they made the choices that they did.
So who's this course designed for? Who would be the ideal student for this course?
I think one of the main demographics that it's aimed at is people who are developers who have this thought that they don't know what looks good. They can't tell what's good design, what's bad design. Just trying to get across to them that the same approach to developing can be applied to visuals.
What is that approach?
It's just thinking through problems. It's really just design is a methodical approach to solving a problem when it comes down to it.
Interesting. So that's one group, developers that don't have much of a design sense and would like to implement better design in the products that they develop. Is there another group? Do you need to be a developer?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think this is, I mean, we really wanted this course to be like a really great, solid introduction to kind of like the fundamental design principles. So for people who just have an interest in getting into design, maybe they just want to explore the space, they're not quite sure, you know, what route in the design field they want to go in. I think this is a great way to sort of explore that.
Do I need to know Photoshop before I take the course?
No. No, we made it very, very simple to get started with Photoshop. One of the key things is keeping in mind that people may have never opened Photoshop before in their lives. So we go from step one, installing it, you know, actually like getting the file up ESD ready to hand off to somebody who develops something. So.
They kind of so once let's say I come to conclusion this would be a great course for me. What's the outcome? What do I expect to learn by the end of the course?
I think one of the main goals in writing the course was to make sure that students are learning just enough basics and doing enough projects so they can get up and running as designers by the end of the course. And you can, and with the basic skills that you learned and with the set of projects that you complete in this, you know, 2-month course, you should be able to say to your friend, you know, I'm ready to help you design your new company website, and you have the tools and the skills to do it. And I think the community surrounding the course is going to be a really great resource for students. If you have questions or ideas, it'll be a great forum for bouncing things around. Your mentor, as with all people courses, is also there to walk you through any questions that you have on how to apply this to your own projects.
That's interesting.
So from a designer's perspective, Natalie and Derek, what is it about this course that feels different from other courses you've seen on the web? You know, there are tons of tutorials out there for how to learn Photoshop and how to learn Illustrator. How is this different in your guys'
I think, well, I can think of a couple cool things about this course. One is that we want you to have kind of a deliverable at the end, so something to show for all of the work that you've done. Whereas like maybe other tutorials kind of just teach you like one-off skills, you're going to have something at the end to kind of present. And secondly, I think the mentorship component is huge and going to be so helpful for people. At least I know for like myself when I was getting started, and even now, mentors have played a huge role for me in improving my skills, learning new tips and tricks. Yeah, so I think those two things are really important.
Derek, do you also still have design mentors?
Well, I've actually stopped designing full time. I design on my side projects, and you know, as a front-end developer, you still have to make sort of design choices, things like that. But I'm still in touch with all my design mentors, quite a few. So yeah, we're friends now. That's a little more even playing field. Nice. They're coming to me for website help and stuff like that. So
you are the mentor.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome transition.
But yeah, when I started it, you know, I started as an apprentice, which basically meant I stood behind a much more senior designer and just watched him work for hours and asked, you know, interrupted, and what key command was that? Like, why are you doing that? Why did you make that color? Why did you pick that font? Like all these questions I asked, I got answers for. So that's what I think sets Thinkful in general apart from other learning platforms, online learning platforms, where you literally ask somebody why they would chose something, why they do it that way.
Interesting. I'd love to dig a little more deeper into the actual units in the course. Mm-hmm. So when you join the course, your first week, what do you have students do during that first week?
Well, the first project is customizing a style tile. which is basically a collection of design assets like color palette, font choices, iconography, maybe some examples for user interface choices, logo, things like that. Things that'll just you'll be able to keep referring to as you work on the project.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of introduced it we give them an example of a style tile and we have them sort of customize it to fit a rebrand of Amazon.com. It starts out just introducing the concepts of design, so color, typography, through the project of customizing the style tile.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And what about in terms of jumping into Photoshop? Like, how quickly do I get into Photoshop?
Pretty much right away. The first thing you do is read a little bit, but then the next thing you do is jump right into the PSD and quickly start making changes to the example one. We call out some little errors that we made, a few things that are unfinished in the PSD. And then you immediately save those and duplicate it, start working on the rebrand of Amazon.
Interesting.
When I started out, one of the best things that I did was dig through old files, like finished completed projects, just to see how people got that effect. It was all print, so there was a lot of lighting and retouching. The web is very different from that, so it's a lot simpler, I think, to understand the file structure of a PSD when it's a web project. So I spent weeks just like how did they get that lighting effect, things like that. So I just kind of wanted to translate that to the web as needed.
Interesting. And Natalie, after the Amazon rebranding project, what's next? What's the next project that would be?
After Amazon?
Mm-hmm.
So after Amazon, we're going to work on a redesign of Craigslist. That's correct, right? That's the one you guys are talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, Unity.
Yeah, so, and that's a really cool project because you're going to take, the things that you're learning or that you learned from Unit 1 and really get to, expand upon those in Unit 2. And Craigslist, as I'm sure you guys know, is, could use some help. So
it's due
that's
for an update for sure.
Yeah, due for an update. So, and that's a cool project because it's such a highly used product, and we kind of guide you and give you the tools without too much hand-holding, but guide you along to help you make improvements to it.
And one great thing about the course, I think, as we've described it so far, is that these are websites that most people use all the time. And just thinking about them from a design perspective instead of from the user perspective, I think is a really interesting way to shift your thinking towards, more towards what a designer would do. We all look at Craigslist, and honestly, I know that it looks outdated, but I never once thought about how I could ever fix it. So thinking about this unit, I think it should change the way we all use the web at least a little bit. Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
That's interesting. And then there's after the Craigslist, there's a final project.
Mm-hmm.
What does the final project look like?
Well, the third part of the final project is redesigning the home page of Craigslist. Because for Unit 2, we actually focus on the internal pages, the posting page and the listing page. And once you finish that, you extrapolate everything you did onto the home page. And then if you want to go further, you can come up with your own idea of these are called unsolicited redesigns, and they've led to people getting great job offers. The example that I would think of is this designer Andrew Kim, who he did a rebrand really of Microsoft right around the time Windows 8 came out, and he right out of school was offered a job at Xbox. So you can get offered a job at Craigslist,
They seem stubborn. Cool. So I have a question for Zoe.
All right, Mark.
So Zoe is the project manager for this course, and she's an instructional designer for this course. And I'm curious, what approach did you take educationally to ensure that the way that we're teaching design is the best way for students to learn it?
Yeah, I think the guiding principle when building this course was to make sure that for as much time as possible, you are actively using the skills that a designer needs. So right away, we have students jumping into a project in Photoshop. We really wanted to stay away from the tutorial model. We didn't want students watching videos about small aspects of Photoshop because, to be honest, you don't need to know every tool in Photoshop to get going. And so diving right into that first project, I think, gives students the confidence and also the context to use those design skills right away. And then we sort of build out from there. So you start with a small project, a style tile, and then you move on to something that's a bit more conceptual. And in education speak, we scaffolded this course with something fairly easy, and we do a bit of hand-holding, and then we sort of send you off more and more independently as the course progresses. And by the end of the course, you're designing from your own ideas, using all those concepts that you learned along the way in practice. And of course, always with the help of your mentor, being available to fill in any gaps. Maybe you were confused about a particular Photoshop tool, or a design concept is confusing to you. Maybe color theory is just super crazy and you don't get it. So your mentor is always going to be available to you to check in.
Cool. And Zoe, you worked with both Derek and Natalie and several other writers on this course. And you're not a designer.
No, I'm not.
What did you learn about design?
I have learned a tremendous amount working on this. It's unbelievable. I had some really basic graphic design knowledge, and working with the writers on the course, it really actually did change the way that I think about a lot of sites that I use, apps that I use. Just really thinking about design as something that's supposed to benefit me as a user. Really changed the way I approach products. Reading a bit of this book, The Design of Everyday Things, which we encourage students to read in the course, just the very beginning of it, talks about how we interact with products. It's the designer's job to make sure that it's usable, that the user has an intuitive experience with it, and maybe feel way better about all those times where they can't figure out whether the closure will open the door.
Yeah.
Because apparently that's not my fault. That's a design problem.
If you find you're in a situation where you're annoyed by something, most likely somebody made a bad design choice.
Cool. So we're just about done, and I'd love to end kind of by asking both Derek and Natalie to just give some, specific advice to a budding designer, someone who's just looking to get into design. What should their first steps be? What should their approach be? Any sort of advice that you felt maybe you received and was helpful, or that you didn't receive and you wish you got when you were just starting out? Can we start with Derek?
Well, just design is a huge, it's a lot of concepts. So just take it piece by piece. Just start with the basics. Just start with color. Start with typography. Don't get bogged down in all of the various details. Just start from a high concept level, and everything else. Usually, as you're working through a design problem, if you start with the content and design around that content, the obvious choices will present themselves. The obvious thing. A lot of designers, when it comes to the web, a lot of designers start with like a background image, or a hero image, like the giant image at the top of the page, and that stuff is great till once you have thought through the process the problem that you want to solve. Usually, it's presenting content in a readable way. So start with that. Start with the things people are going to read, the images that need to be seen, the videos, things like that on the page, and then just let the design form around that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I would add to that, if you're just starting out, don't be afraid to share your work with people. There's this great quote, I think it's by Ira Glass, who talks about when you're starting out on like a creative endeavor, how what you produce might not match what you want it to be, or like your taste level. And I would just encourage you, if you're starting out in the design field, like get your work out there, show it to as many people as you can, get as much feedback as you can from designers and non-designers alike, because I mean that's really how you're going to improve, is when people can help critique your work.
Cool, that's great. All right, so that's it. We will probably never do this again. I'm just kidding.
Thanks, guys.
But thank you so much. It was really great.
Bye.